60 Hz, the baseline. A 60 Hz display refreshes the image on your smartphone screen 60 times every second. That means each frame stays visible for about 16.6 milliseconds before it is replaced by the next one. For more than a decade, this was the standard across nearly all phones, tablets, and laptops. A refresh rate of 60 Hz is enough to match the frame rate of most video content because most films are recorded at 24 frames per second, and most television and online videos use 30 or 60 frames per second. At this rate, motion appears smooth enough for normal scrolling and video playback, but fast transitions or animation sequences reveal a faint stutter or judder effect. You can notice this when quickly swiping between home screens or scrolling long social feeds. The lower refresh rate also means less work for the graphics processor and backlight driver, resulting in lower power consumption and longer battery life. Because the screen updates only 60 times per second, the motion blur from pixel response time is usually more noticeable, especially on older LCD panels. Despite its limits, 60 Hz remains the most power-efficient option for phones where battery endurance is the priority rather than fluid motion. 90 Hz, the first upgrade. The jump from 60 Hz to 90 Hz marked the first major step toward smoother smartphone displays. A 90 Hz panel refreshes the image 90 times each second, which means each frame lasts around 11 milliseconds. That reduction in frame duration makes scrolling and interface animations feel significantly more fluid. Text remains readable while moving, and icons glide instead of jittering across the screen. Early models like the OnePlus 7 Pro and the Google Pixel 4 popularized this standard, proving that a higher refresh rate could make a phone feel faster even if its processor speed stayed the same. From a technical standpoint, the display controller must drive half again as many frames per second as before, so it naturally consumes more energy. However, the additional power draw is modest compared with the jump to 120 Hz. 90 Hz quickly became a sweet spot between responsiveness and efficiency, allowing mid-range devices to deliver a premium feel without a major hit to battery life. In practice, the improvement is most visible during user interface navigation, web browsing, and social media scrolling. In video playback, the effect is smaller because most video content still runs at 60 frames per second or lower. Overall, 90 Hz set the stage for the high refresh era, offering tangible smoothness gains while staying accessible in both price and performance. 120 Hz. A 120 Hz display refreshes the image 120 times per second, cutting frame duration down to about 8.3 milliseconds. This doubles the visual update rate compared to a 60 Hz screen and creates a dramatic improvement in perceived responsiveness. When you scroll through menus, switch between apps, or swipe in games, every motion feels immediate and lifelike. Many flagship smartphones now use 120 Hz panels as standard, including Samsung Galaxy, iPhone Pro, and Google Pixel Pro series. The higher rate allows the interface to synchronize with gaming engines or animation systems running at the same frame rate, producing clearer, smoother motion with reduced blur. To balance power consumption, most of these displays rely on adaptive control systems such as low-temperature polycrystalline oxide, often abbreviated LTPO technology. LTPO panels can dynamically lower their refresh rate to 60, 30, or even 10 Hz when the image on the screen is static, such as during reading or always-on display modes. This adaptive adjustment helps preserve battery life without sacrificing responsiveness when motion resumes. However, the benefit depends on software support. Not every app or game is coded to render 120 frames per second, so some experiences remain capped at 60. Even so, 120 Hz has become the baseline for modern premium smartphones, striking an effective balance between speed, clarity, and endurance. 144 Hz and 165 Hz. Refresh rates above 120 Hz are primarily designed for competitive mobile gaming. A 144 Hz panel refreshes every 6.9 milliseconds, and a 165 Hz panel refreshes every 6.0 milliseconds. These numbers describe how frequently the display can update the on-screen image, not how fast the game itself runs, but they allow the rendered frames to appear with minimal delay and motion blur. Devices like the Asus ROG Phone, Lenovo Legion, and Red Magic 6 introduced these extremely high refresh panels to maximize reaction precision and visual clarity in fast-paced games. When you look at the difference between 120 and 144 144 Hz. It is subtle. Most users notice the improvement only in side-by-side comparisons, especially when scrolling or panning quickly across a game scene. The difference between 144 and 165 Hz is even harder to perceive with the human eye, since the marginal gain in fluidity is smaller than what you experience when moving from 90 to 120 Hz. The trade-off is energy usage and thermal output. Driving a screen that updates 165 times per second demands higher processing and display driver workload, which increases battery drain and device temperature. Manufacturers often pair these panels with larger batteries and enhanced cooling systems. Outside of gaming, the benefit of such high refresh rates diminishes. Standard applications, social media, and videos rarely run beyond 60 or 120 frames per second, so these ultra-high refresh panels mainly serve enthusiasts seeking the absolute smoothest experience possible. Adaptive and variable refresh rate. Modern flagship displays use adaptive refresh control to balance smoothness and efficiency. This technology allows the screen to change its refresh rate dynamically based on what is being shown. For example, a display might run at 120 Hz while scrolling or gaming, drop to 60 Hz for normal use, fall to 30 or 10 Hz during static reading, and even reach 1 Hz for an always-on display. The ability to vary the refresh rate in real time is what makes features like LTPO, low-temperature polycrystalline oxide, possible. LTPO is a special type of thin-film transistor layer that allows fine-grained control of the driving voltage in each pixel, making it easier to scale frequency without visual artifacts. The operating system's scheduler and the display driver coordinate when to raise or lower the refresh rate. When content begins to move, the software signals the display to increase its frequency instantly, restoring smooth motion. When the image becomes static, it lowers the rate to save power. This system, sometimes referred to as variable refresh rate or VRR, reduces battery drain that would otherwise occur if a 120 Hz panel stayed fixed at maximum speed all day. It also prevents screen tearing by synchronizing the refresh cycle with the graphics processor's frame output. Adaptive refresh technology has become essential for balancing performance and efficiency, allowing smartphones with high refresh screens to maintain long battery life without compromising responsiveness or visual quality. Touch sampling rate versus refresh rate. Touch sampling rate and refresh rate are two different specifications, though they are often confused. The refresh rate measures how many times per second the screen updates the image you see. The touch sampling rate measures how many times per second the display's digitizer checks for new input from your finger. For example, a screen might refresh at 120 Hz, but sample touch input at 240 Hz. That means the device is reading your finger position twice as often as it redraws the image, reducing the delay between your movement and the corresponding action on screen. A higher touch sampling rate improves responsiveness during tasks that rely on precise timing, such as drawing, typing, or gaming. When the sampling rate is low, there is a brief lag between your touch and the phone's reaction, which can make controls feel less accurate. Competitive gaming phones often advertise touch sampling rates above 300 or even 500 Hz. This does not make the visuals smoother, because that still depends on refresh rate, but it allows the device to respond more quickly to fast input. The processor interprets these touch signals and updates the next rendered frame accordingly. Both metrics work together. Refresh rate defines how often the picture changes, while touch sampling defines how quickly the screen senses your interaction. An optimal balance between the two produces the perception of instantaneous response, which is critical for high-performance smartphones. When refresh rate actually matters, a high refresh rate produces visible benefits only in certain situations. The most obvious is during scrolling and user interface animation. At 120 Hz, icons, text, and lists glide smoothly without the subtle stutter that appears on a 60 Hz display. This makes transitions look continuous and natural. The improvement is also clear when using stylus input or gesture navigation, since the drawn lines or swipes track closer to your real-time movement. Gaming is another area where refresh rate matters. Games that render frames at 90, 120, or higher frames per second can display more precise motion and reduce input delay. Competitive titles such as first-person shooters or racing games feel more responsive because the interval between frames is shorter. However, the advantage only exists if the game and the system on chip are capable of outputting matching frame rates. For video playback, the impact of refresh rate is limited. Movies are typically filmed at 24 frames per second, while television and online clips use 30 or 60 frames per second. Beyond that, extra refresh cycles do not add information because the source content itself is not higher. Instead, video players use frame interpolation or pull-down techniques to match the display's frequency. Finally, there is always a trade-off between smoothness and efficiency. High refresh modes consume more battery power and generate more heat, since the display and graphics processor must work harder. Adaptive refresh systems try to minimize this by lowering the rate during idle moments, but the balance between performance and endurance remains a key design challenge. Display technology impact. The type of display technology determines how well a panel handles high refresh rates. Organic light-emitting diode, or OLED, screens have extremely fast pixel response times because each pixel emits its own light directly. This allows crisp motion even at 120 Hz or higher. However, OLED panels often use pulse width modulation, or PWM, dimming to control brightness. At lower brightness levels, the rapid on-off flicker of PWM can cause visible flicker or eye strain for some users, especially when combined with high refresh frequencies. Liquid crystal displays, or LCDs, work differently. They rely on a constant backlight shining through liquid crystals that physically twist to block or allow light. This process is slower, so LCDs tend to show more motion blur at high refresh rates. The advantage is that LCDs do not use PWM dimming and therefore avoid flicker artifacts. They can also maintain uniform brightness without efficiency loss, but the slower pixel transition times limit motion clarity compared with OLED. Low-temperature polycrystalline oxide, or LTPO, OLED panels combine the benefits of both systems. They keep the instantaneous response of OLED pixels while adding circuitry that enables precise control of refresh frequency. This allows the screen to drop to extremely low rates, even 1 Hz, without losing image stability or brightness consistency. LTPO panels are now the preferred choice for premium smartphones because they achieve smooth motion, wide dynamic refresh range, and excellent power efficiency at the same time. The evolution of these technologies continues to refine how high refresh displays perform in real-world use. Future of smartphone refresh rates. The refresh race has not stopped at 165 Hz. Display manufacturers already have experimental mobile panels running at 240 Hz, primarily for research and specialized gaming prototypes. These ultra-fast screens push the boundaries of motion clarity, but they also highlight diminishing perceptual returns. Beyond 120 Hz, most people can barely distinguish the improvement in normal usage. The focus of future development is therefore shifting from raw frequency toward efficiency and comfort. One major direction is predictive refresh control using artificial intelligence. By analyzing touch patterns, scroll velocity, and on-screen activity, an AI-driven display controller can anticipate when motion will occur and raise the refresh rate only for those frames. This predictive method saves more energy than simple adaptive scaling because it reduces unnecessary high-frequency cycles. Another area of advancement is optimizing pulse width modulation, dimming to reduce flicker without sacrificing brightness consistency, improving eye comfort during long use. Manufacturers are also exploring hybrid architectures that combine organic and micro-LED elements for instant pixel transitions with minimal power draw. These new materials could sustain 120 Hz or higher motion while operating at lower voltages. Ultimately, the next phase of smartphone display design is not about reaching higher Hertz numbers, but about achieving perfect balanced screens that remain sharp, responsive, and efficient under every condition. The future of refresh rate technology will focus less on speed and more on intelligent control and visual stability. I made an awesome video about every display cable, so don't miss it, okay?